Hello, everybody, and welcome to Rock Solid News. It is Monday, October 23rd, and we do have a good one for you this evening. The title, 15-Minute Cities, a warning from the past. How could this be? 15-minute cities in the past. Take it from a Newfoundlander. You're going to want to tune in, and as well, we're going to chat very briefly about some of the things that are distracting us from what's actually happening here at home. So you're going to want to stay tuned. Come back to us in about a minute.
So, the high school drama teacher over here accuses others of liking the sounds of their own voices.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I was a high school teacher before getting into politics, and I'm having a little trouble remembering what exactly the job that the Leader of the Opposition had before getting into politics.
Yes, and he left right in the middle of the semester, and I'm having trouble remembering why.
The small fringe minority who are holding unacceptable views do not represent the views of Canadians whose beds are filled with people who chose not to get vaccinated. The risk posed to all of us by unvaccinated people. It's never too late to do the right thing. We'll be immensely pleased to be able to give you that first dose of vaccine.
I'd like to welcome the fake news media,
and the ideology in order to push particular agendas, and I think some of those agendas, unfortunately, pretty hardcore, pretty extreme. The power of misinformation, because so much, of what we hear coming from these protesters, from a scientific perspective, just isn't true. And
can you state categorically? You are fake news,
Sir.
You are fake news indeed. Hello to Facebook, hello to YouTube, and on the side here, on my side device, hello to Rumble, because of course, Rumble is not supported here on StreamYard for whatever reason. Draw your own conclusions. So hello, welcome back. It is Monday, October 23rd, and we got a good one for you. We're talking 15-minute cities, which is a warning from the past. If you're a history buff in Canadian history, or if you just happen to have an East Coast connection, whichever way that works, you might know what I'm talking about when I say resettlement, and we'll get into that. But first, what's distracting us from that? Take an honest look back at the last couple of months and think about the news cycle that you've been fed. Cycles, plural, I should say. Think about the news cycles and what they've been about. Have they been about local issues at home, what's happening, or not? There was a lot of Russia-Ukraine, and though that's still an ongoing conflict or war, or, well, you have to call it a war because we've sunk billions into it and are continuing to do so. But that's been put on the back burner, as you guys all know, because there's a new, cool, hot war happening in Palestine with the Israelis and the Hamas/Palestinians. And we're not going to get into taking sides on either of these wars. I'll give you a very quick analysis of how you as a Canadian citizen should be viewing this. I'm not telling you how to think. I'm telling you how I think you should be viewing it, and that's it. And then it's up to you guys as fully grown adults to make up your mind from there. So we'll see how that goes. And all this, if you're being honest with yourself, and ideally, if you see things the way I do as we go through this, all these foreign stories are meant to distract you from something that's happening here at home, more close to home, and will actually tangibly affect your everyday life. And often is the case, by the way. So whenever you get hit with these constant news cycle, and it's a quick repeat, you know that there's something else happening. So it's time to start looking and finding out what that is. So first you had Russia, Ukraine. That was the first big one that kind of got us out of COVID. COVID was a hot button topic. We're all trying to think, are mandates coming back, all this, and then Russia, Ukraine hit. So that was a nice distraction from what was happening at home with COVID. And we sunk billions. We as Canadians, and then we as the West even more, sunk billions into a proxy war with Russia and Ukraine. That means absolutely nothing back home. What it means back home here is that we have more immigrants to take in. That's tangibly the only outcome that affects you here as a Canadian citizen when it comes to Russia and Ukraine. Now we have Israel and Hamas. We'll just call it that for now. So we have Israel and Hamas. A seemingly bizarre attack with some weird details. Either way, that's led now to another full-scale war. Another Western intervention is imminent. There's already been mobilization with American and I believe some Canadian. And now funding, right? Money, because, and it's not just in Israel or in Palestine or what either of you guys consider to be that land in question. Israel has targeted places in Lebanon as well. So it looks like that war is going to keep escalating and maybe possibly outshadow the Russia-Ukraine war, possibly because that wasn't going as you were being told and it's about to be proven so. So we need to move away from one distraction and move you on to another. And yes, as the Rumble chat rightfully just pointed out, it's very much like the Colosseum at Rome. Absolutely. And if you give them bread and circus, it's all good. Here's what you need to understand. As a Canadian citizen, as someone who's living here in Canada, because that's the majority of the people going to be watching this content. Now, if maybe you're American and maybe you're living in America, the same will apply to you. So don't worry. Your view on Russia, Ukraine, and on Israel, whatever, should be as follows. Is it happening on Canadian soil? Yes or no? No, I don't care. End of story. In fact, there should be no funding or troops, boots on the ground, whatever you want to call it. As a Canadian, you should just stop enabling, stop participating, stop funding, and encouraging foreign wars. You don't understand what war is. It's mostly a movie concept to people here in the West. If war ever comes knocking on our door here and all of our resources are exhausted because we've been sending them off to fight these proxy wars in parts of the world that we don't, are not relevant to us. If and when it comes on to our front door, we're not going to have the resources to fight it. And then you're going to find out how bad war really is. Stop enabling, stop participating, stop funding, just stop. That's it. Don't participate. That's it. Get out of that. Stop supporting the fact that we're going to go take a side in a war. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if we're talking about this country versus that country. It works across the board. You have to ask yourself, is the conflict in question occurring on Canadian soil? Or possibly an extension of that question, is it right on my door, meaning on my border? If you can answer no to those questions, done. We're done. Okay, next question or next topic. There's no need for participation, funding, enabling. There's no need for death. Stop fighting and enabling these wars. Excuse me. So if you're struggling to take a side on your next social media post, or you want to go into the comment section and argue, stand with this or stand with that, stand with yourself and your own people at home. That will make everything better here tangibly. And even when because we're back to the news cycle now that I was bringing up, and this was the news cycle, right? It started once we got out of COVID, we moved into Russia, Ukraine, and we've slid beautifully into Israel, Gaza, Israel, Palestine / Lebanon now, apparently. Even when the news cycle involves something at home, like let's say Trudeau, it's generally been about foreign policy. We're talking India. So we're talking about diplomats being expelled, Canadian diplomats in India being expelled, Indian diplomats in Canada being expelled. Again, it's all foreign stuff. Does a Canadian diplomat's status in New Delhi have any tangible effect on your life as a Canadian citizen at home? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Therefore, you should treat it that way. And unfortunately, our news doesn't. These are all everything that you get fed in a rinse and repeat news cycle is done for a purpose, to keep you focused on something. And as soon as your focus dwindles to the point where you start looking somewhere else, that focus needs to come back to where they need it. So a new war or a new story or a new scandal, you know what I mean? And the Trudeau government is sinking so badly that they don't even care. At this point, they'll shoot themselves in the foot in terms of putting themselves under the bus. The latest scandal, now that it's back home, now that we're kind of focusing back home on Canadian Parliament, the latest scandal was the newly appointed, quote unquote, elected Speaker of the House and his decision to pause question period so that he could make a speech, and the little back and forth that went on with the leader of the opposition, Pierre P.P. Poilievre, which is not the correct way to pronounce his name, and I don't care. It's all just about House parliamentary stuff. Nothing of substance and nothing that is actually tangibly affecting your life. Again, distraction. So what is actually happening in Canadian governance that is affecting your life? Universal basic income, that's being read in the Senate. And also 15-minute cities. Now, the first time people talked about 15-minute cities a couple of years back, it was viewed as a conspiracy theory, and it had a lot to do with COVID. A lot of people were using it as like this is what they're going to do to lock us down. They're going to put us in these cities. So this, now you have actual cities like Edmonton, as we're going to see, places in BC, sorry, Elizabeth, looking at installing what you can only describe as a ghetto, but 15-minute compartmentalized cities, I think is how they put it. You'll see now in a minute when we run the clip. So a 15-minute city will absolutely tangibly affect your life here in Canada as a resident or Canadian citizen. And I've had people say, well, it won't be so bad because you've got everything you need in one little place. And me and my family live in the same city. Think about Edmonton now. Me and my family live in the same city, so it's fine. Do you not understand that if you divide Edmonton into 15-minute cities, it gets segmented? Edmonton itself is not a 15-minute city. The city of Edmonton would produce multiple 15-minute cities. So imagine now you're not in the same quadrant or district as your family members. Say you live across town. Now you're so close, but so far away from that family member. And to give you an idea of how 15-minute cities work and how harmful They will be, because we're talking in the future, but have been, as if we're talking past tense. So I'm going to relay 15-minute cities and their consequences to something that's already happened in Canada in my father's lifetime. So we don't have to go back far. For reference, I'm mid-30s. Districts represents, yes, Hunger Games, absolutely, Elizabeth. And you'll see when we run the clip. There you go. So the consequences of a 15-minute city and how that's already occurred here in Canada. Now, you see the moniker on the bottom of the screen here in Newfoundland. That's my kind of online alter ego, implying that I come from Newfoundland, which I do, born and raised, and still live here in Newfoundland. In the 1960s, the Newfoundland government instituted a program that became known as resettlement, colloquially known as the government's game, centralization, whatever. They went to the rural communities in Newfoundland and told them that they had months to sort themselves out, and that the governments would be coming back in government ships and taking them and whatever possessions they could gather on a ship and relocating them. And sometimes they got to pick, sometimes they were told where they were going, and oftentimes they were given allowances so that they could build new houses in their new communities that they were being dumped into. And it was all about getting the rural into the urban. And we'll read some quotes about that from people of the day just to kind of reinstate that. And what did resettlement lead to? It led to government independence. It led to less self-reliance. And it led eventually to even more of that. With it enabled them to close our fishery on us. The one actual moneymaker we had here in the province, they convinced us to close that down overnight. So that's how bad it gets when you're relocated in such a way. So before we get too far, let's take a quick look. This is a 2-minute clip of Edmonton and the concept of, Liz, if you're still here, districts and all that. Have a look and we'll be back in 2 minutes.
Being able to walk from home to a grocery store, doctor's office, playground, or school. Not just a list of things people often look for when buying a home, but goals the city of Edmonton has for all neighborhoods to become 15-minute communities.
Where you can find employment and entertainment and recreation and retail amenities within 15 minutes of your front door.
Councillor Tim Cartmel describes the 15-minute communities plan or district plan as a shift in ethics for city planning, as Edmonton looks to be a more livable city and give residents more options. But the urban planning has been getting some negative attention online. People sharing a map of Canterbury, UK, claiming it's Edmonton's plan to lock us in our neighborhoods, something the mayor calls misinformation.
Edmontonians are very smart and sophisticated people who understand and not believe in these conspiracy theories being promoted on the social media.
This nonsensical conspiracy theory thing that's happening, and understand what we're talking about. I live in a 15-minute community.
If you live in a core neighborhood, you can probably already walk to many of these amenities listed in the city plan. But Councillor Cartmel says it's newer neighborhoods, like here in Windermere, that there's more work to be done.
You can send your kid on his bike down to the splash pad or to the skateboard park, which you cannot do in Windermere right now because they don't exist.
And while 15-minute communities may seem like a new thing,
the idea is not very new. But certainly the naming is new and it is catchy and it sort of makes sense for people as to what the city is or any municipality is trying to do.
It's just a rebrand of
It's just a rebrand of an old concept, which is true in many different ways. And And I want you to notice the wording and the intent behind what they're saying, because it's making it about convenience, right? And then of course they have to throw in the conspiracy theory part about it, because no mainstream cathedral media news story is complete without fully gaslighting you about, if you question this in any way, you are indeed a conspiracy theorist and you will be mocked, right? So notice everything's about convenience and it's all good, don't worry. But what will that lead to? Government dependence, less self-reliance, and more government control, which is exactly what happened in Newfoundland. Now, I told you that the government came and said, you got to go, right? And people don't believe me when I say this. This is a 1 minute clip. 1 minute clip from the 1960s of men in Newfoundland and Labrador literally taking their house, rolling it down a hill, not rolling the house, sliding it on rollers, down to the water, and floating their home across the bay to the community in which they were either forced or chose to be forced to move to. Just look at this incredible feat.
Moving house in Newfoundland can cause a lot of excitement. One reason is that here moving house means just that, taking the old homestead away, lock, stock and barrel, and putting it somewhere else. A process rather like launching a ship, only in this case they use manpower as well as gravity. It's all part of a centralization scheme. People from outlying fishing villages are being resettled near some of Newfoundland's new industries. It's a voluntary plan, but many people are taking advantage of it. This house has certainly got the skids under it, and they'll soon have it down on the raft. 20 homes had already been moved in this way when the picture was taken. Once aboard the raft, the house is taken in tow. Well, I hope they got settled in time for Christmas.
I love the way the old footage just feels, the sound of it, everything. And yes, Beth, this is not a conspiracy theory. And politicians alike are lying about it. They'll gaslight you about it. And it doesn't matter. If you question any part of any narrative, you get called that. It's part of the official gaslighting process that occurs. The name, yes, exactly. Core community districts. It's all very Hunger Games like. And a couple of notes on that video you just saw. You notice it was called a centralization scheme because, of course, even at the time, it was recognized as a scheme to bring the people who were self-reliant away from their self-reliance, move them to a bigger urban area where their skills were no longer needed, and therefore they had no purpose and had to become reliant on the government. Sounds familiar? Yes, exactly, which is the idea behind the 15-minute cities. So, and yes, if they can do it in Newfoundland, they can do it anywhere. Remember, a lot like you have a modern concept of what a Newfoundlander is right now. The fighting Newfoundlander died. That's why they were able to do this. There was once a time when there was a fighting Newfoundlander. Most Newfoundlanders draw their heritage from a Celtic lineage, not from the Anglo-Saxon lineage. This is what makes us different from the rest of Canada. It's not just we talk funny because of that. Most of us are Celtic by blood, not Anglo-Saxon. And so there was a fighting Newfoundlander. There was once a time in the early 1900s or late 1800s, whichever one, where a couple of thousand men with pitchforks and sticks on fire, whatever you call those things, and stormed what you would call our Parliament building, looking for the Premier or the Prime Minister at the time, because we were our self-dominion of our own. This was before we were part of Canada, so we had our own Prime Minister, not our own Premier. And the last thing I'll say about that, he said it was voluntary. I'm not sure where he's getting that from, unless, of course, this was more government propaganda. And yeah, I can read your first account. Funny, Jeff. It was not voluntary. Okay. So I'm gonna bring your attention to a couple of songs now, some from pop culture, from Newfoundland pop culture. One of them is called "Out from St. Leonard's," and St. Leonard's was one of the islands in Placentia Bay, which was a thriving fishing bay on both sides. St. Leonard's and Taslow were two very thriving islands in that bay. Those two islands were almost entirely resettled. I say almost entirely because there was a community of fighting Newfoundlanders left who actually decided to stay and have their power cut off and whatever and just go with it. And they're still here to this day. So take that, and do what you will with it. Out from St. Leonard's is a song that was written about resettlement in Newfoundland, and the chorus, because you just saw the house being towed away, right? So and it's out from St. Leonard's and out from Taslow. They'd steam across the bay with their houses in tow, with their beds in the bow and their stoves in the stern, bound away with their sons and their daughters. They took everything they had and floated their houses across the bay. That was not done voluntarily. I can attest to that, not directly firsthand, because obviously it wasn't me. My father was resettled, and my father was actually resettled from a community on St. Leonard's. My father was literally cast out from St. Leonard's, as the song puts it. The government ships showed up at the end of the summer, early fall, and they made their rounds in the community, instructing the population there that they were going to be back in the late spring, and that you had two choices. You could go into St. Mary's Bay, or you could go straight to Placentia, which was the central urban area. Many went to Placentia to live on the dole, as the song puts it, dole being welfare. Because again, these were all very skilled individuals with their hands. They knew how to thrive and live and survive off the land. They didn't know how to be educated in the jobs that were available in an urban area. And coercion and threats to one's freedoms and stuff. But Liz, the funny thing is, they were very open about it at the time. That was some more major gaslighting there in that video. So my father's family, again, like I said, they came in the late summer, early fall, and they told the population there, here's your two choices. We're coming back. Have your choice made and have your stuff ready. If you want to keep your house, that's on you. We're dealing with bodies and possessions that will fit on our ship to bring you to your destination. We'll be back on this date in the late spring. Have your decisions made and be ready. And my father's family was. When the government ships came back, they were ready, they had their decision made, and they were cast out from St. Leonard's, as the song puts it. There's another song, The Government Game. Centralization, they say, was the name, but I just calls it the government's game, because the government was playing a game with this population. It needed a certain amount of control, and in order to derive that certain amount of control, it needed to physically control the population. And you can't control a population that is self-reliant. So you have to create the government dependence that's now there. So the government game, another song we'll look up, but that is about St. Karen's a community in St. Cairns, which was on St. Leonard's Island up in the north part. So again, even that song is written about the same area in the same bay in Newfoundland, but about a completely different aspect of it, because this song talks about going to Placentia. And both these songs are incredibly heartbreaking. I'll make this challenge now. And the challenge only applies to the men, but here we go. If you're a man and you can listen to the government game without crying, I want you to stop following this page, because we don't want lawyers on this page. And that's as simple as I can put it. Obviously, for those of you who've been, vaccine damaged, I'm just joking. Okay. One more song, The Great Harbor Deep, which was written about a completely different part of Newfoundland. And it was a very thriving fishing community up north. And they took those people and left. And the song is heartbreaking. Every single line and every line of the chorus is absolutely heartbreaking. It talks about how sad, like from the author's perspective, this man who's moving, he has this beautiful line to open the verse where he's talking about how the boats are being dragged up and they're stuck to shore, and even the seagulls won't even come up from the shore anymore because they can tell everybody's leaving. Everybody's packed up. There's no more regular occurrences happening, which was fishing, which is why the seagulls were around. The seagulls had figured it out. That's how dead the community had already become, that the seagulls weren't even coming up from the shore, because there was no point, there was no fish for them to try to steal from the fishermen as they were laying it out to dry, and yada, yada, yada. Things were much better when I was a lad, when 2 working hands were all a man had. The sea was our mother and she called us from land, but now she seems like a stranger. Again, just heartbreaking stuff, right? But what of the men we left there in the ground who died breathing life in that town? Because the only thing that's left is the cemeteries in those communities. Their dead fathers, their dead mothers and grandparents, and so on and so forth. That's all that's left there. The structures have all crumbled. The whatever pathways and roads they had carved out have been overgrown. The only thing left on the island now, or in the community, are their dead relatives. And that theme comes across in every single song in Newfoundland culture when it comes to resettlement or the closing of the cod fishery, which is a completely different topic. So, what does that have to do with 15-minute cities? Well, it has absolutely everything to do with it, because you apply what happened to that population. First of all, how did they convince the people? They created a problem, which is exactly what we see in current day. They create a problem and then they provide you a solution. That's lock, stock, and barrel how they've been operating since you've woken up and since before that. Create a problem. So in resettlement era, it cost too much money to provide you guys the basic necessities. So we're going to have to force you guys to move into these urban areas. And life will be great. Perfect. We'll be able to provide you everything. That's how they were gaslit into getting out. And then it came time when communities were providing pushback where they said, we're coming, we're telling you how it's going to happen, and then we're shutting the power off. So you can stay if you want, but the power will be off. No services will be provided to you, and have fun. And just to let that hit home, so the chorus of this song, we'll move to the cities and they'll pay for our homes, because if this town was a body, it would just be skin and bones. But what of the men who lie here in the ground, who died breathing life in this town? The dreams of our fathers all died in their sleep when they put out the lights in Great Harbor Deep. Now, to drive home that point of the threat, you're going to move, we're going to show up, we're going to provide you with whatever allowances to get out, but you have to get out because we're going to stop providing you the basic necessities. They're down at the powerhouse and they'll soon throw the switch that'll send us to darkness as black as a pitch. And that guy up in Ottawa, that son of a bitch, in his own bed tonight he'll be keeping. So I'll say my goodbyes to these rocks and these trees, and I'll walk through the splendor whenever I please, because the only way back here will be in my dreams. They can't stop a fella from sleeping. That's what pop culture at the time was gushing their heart with here in Newfoundland. And that doesn't take into account Confederation when we joined Canada, and that doesn't take into account the closing of the fishery in the 90s. All I've talked about is the resettlement aspect, because fast forward to 2023, specifically today, Monday, October 23rd, and we have to contend with the idea of 15-minute cities. Now, politicians will lie and gaslight you and tell you that it's just about making it convenient for you. And sure, that's how it'll start. There won't be any barriers. There'll just be, here's your 15-minute area. You've got everything you need. But then it'll start to be, well, if you're leaving your area, you got to scan your way out so that way we know how many people are leaving. And then it'll escalate more. And just think about how it happened with COVID. Think about, you know what I mean? It's pattern recognition. And it's really time for adults to kind of start playing the role of adults, right? So, which goes directly back to the distractions we're currently being fed to bring us away from universal basic income here in Canada, to bring us away from 15-minute cities here in Canada, things that are tangibly affecting you and your loved ones here in Canada in a physical and non-physical manner. You're being distracted away from those things by these wars, these whatever. The same thing again. Just stop. Do not promote the idea of one side being good and the other side being bad. Therefore, I stand with A or I stand against B. You are neither, regardless if you even have familial stake in the battle or ethnical or religious stake in the battle. If you are living as a resident or a citizen here in Canada or the United States or anywhere that isn't one of those places, stop enabling war, stop enabling death, and insist that our resources, both financial and military, be directed where they should be, meaning financially, all national, all provincial, and all municipal resources should be coming directly back to those borders that were therein just discussed, whether it be federal, provincial, or municipal. And military, there shouldn't be a Canadian soldier anywhere that isn't Canadian soil. You're killing, you're going to someone else's country and you're killing. Your military should be here defending your borders. That way, you can assure yourself they're not in somebody else's country killing and murdering. That seems like a good time to end it there. And as a newbie, I'll flash this one up on the screen and say, yeah, why not? And then, absolutely, why not? And you know what's funny? If this were to happen down here, they're like there would still be the idea of Canada, right? If every single province became their own self-governing republic, you could and would still have and need an economic union between the majority of these republics. The ironic thing is, if this newly formed individual provincial republic couldn't find a good deal within the old Canadian borders and the new republics, they would have the option to look elsewhere and see if they can get a better deal for their people, rather than being forced to deal with this centralized body in Ottawa that has absolutely no connection with anybody, not even the people of Ottawa. Yeah, we are citizens of the Hudson's Bay Corporation. And if you don't believe me, go look up the Hudson's Bay Charter and tell me that we're not being governed by that charter to this day. So yeah, that's a fantastic way to end it. Thank you all for listening on Facebook and YouTube over here, on Rumble over here. And I just realized I got some comments to go over here on Rumble. I'll deal with that on the side. Thank you for listening, guys. It's been Monday, October 23rd. We've discussed our 15-minute cities, and we got a warning from the past. And what do you know about history? It repeats itself. We're watching it happen now. Why not try to prevent it? Maybe. And when it comes to these wars, give peace a chance. You'd be surprised. You people, you stay sovereign, okay?